You saw how women can do if they stand together. This was an enormous event.
I'd love to start with Hrava, because I read that you actually were there with your mother. What was the experience like from a child's perspective?
Yes, 1975, and I'm 11 years old. And, my mother was a very proper lady who worked at the Ministry of Finance, proper because, I was always a little more of a brat than my mother. But and my mother was very clear about being very angry or not accepting the difference in pay. And she told me about how it had been all her career, getting less money than the men. And so yes, she brought me to the square, and it was a very euphoric feeling. I mean, of course, I had never seen such a crowd in my life. I mean, we would have maybe, our Independence Day, but nothing to this extent. It was just so crowded. So, well, I remember standing there. I know exactly where I was standing. And I woke up the next morning and I thought, okay, now everything's going to be fixed. But of course, it took a little longer than that.
Can you talk a little bit about the other projects that you've worked on? You had the Red Stockings, which kind of preceded this event.
Yeah, and we did also a film about the Women's Alliance that then, after Vigdis became president, they ran for office, first for the city and then for the parliament, which increased the number of women from 3 to 12 in the first elections, which was a major breakthrough. Because, at that point, there were 52 parliamentary members, and having only 2 women was obviously not very representative of the population of the country. Yeah, I have also done, in 2015, we commemorated the right to vote, women's right to vote, which took place in 1915, 100th anniversary. That year, I did a crazy project, macro or mini documentaries every week, 52 of them. I still don't know how I pulled that off.
But, I don't either.
Yeah,
I can't even write that much.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And then I have worked on also did a documentary that took me 27 years to finish, which was about how civil rights came about for gay people in Iceland.
Pamela, I was reading in your director statement that you were planning a trip to Iceland and you had a Lonely Planet guide. And in there is where you learned first about the Women's Day Off.
Yeah, we were just on a wonderful, walking on glaciers. I was with my son and my husband having a wonderful vacation in Iceland. And I will say it was a few days into the trip, and I'd been noticing statues of women all over the country.
That's refreshing.
Have that very much. There's a big push right now in New York City, where I live, saying, why don't we have any statues of women in Central Park? And there's a whole initiative now. So I was noticing that. And then I came across this paragraph towards the back of the guide saying that on one day in October 1975, 90% of the women stopped doing what women do and brought the country to a standstill. And that as a result, today, Iceland is #1 for gender equality. And honestly, I just thought, how do you get 9 out of 10 women anywhere to do the same thing at the same time? And I couldn't believe that I didn't know the story. And I will say that many years later, after Hrafn and I have gone on this journey and the story is coming out into the world, that's the first thing that audiences say to us. Why didn't I know about this before? So we're really thrilled that we were also able to tell it in time. We felt like I think, Hrafn, we felt like it was a race against time. We started filming in 2016 when I got some initial development money. We formed a partnership. And, the women were still very vibrant. They were in their late 70s, early 80s. 10 years later, I don't know that we could have told the same story, had them tell the story with the same just accessing those memories so vividly. And I think we're really grateful that we were there at the right time.
How did you find all of them? Was it just networking? How did you get them to participate again?
There was one article that I was able to find in the English language, and it was written by a gender scholar in Iceland whose mom had participated in the strike. Her name is Annadís Rudolfsdóttir. There's a beautiful article in The Guardian about this day. And so I contacted her, and she became, she led me to other people. It was not too hard to reach the Red Stockings who had really, started this movement, which led to the strike, because they all know one another. And as soon as you reach one, they're going to connect you with the next. What was a lot harder was filling out the story of ordinary people who, of course, were involved in that day and were changed by that day, but they're not on the record in any way. And that's where when Hrap and I formed a team, we found a fantastic Icelandic researcher who was there at the time. And we had an associate producer, and just everyone was talking to everyone. My memory of those 7 years is just having thousands of cups of coffee with people in Reykjavik who were recommended to Hrapa or someone saw something on Facebook, and just it was like it was kind of this infrastructure, this informal, unknown infrastructure where we started to put the pieces together.
There's this part of the documentary that talks about the letter writing campaign and the reaching out to like 50 different committees or groups to sort of get the word out. But nobody actually knew how many people would show up, if it would be a small group, if it would be a large group. And it ended up being, like just the idea of 90% shocked me. This grassroots word of mouth seems so different now, simply because so many people think being on social media is active.
At that time, they didn't have that tsunami of information upon their heads. So in some way, it was maybe it was easier to organize something like this at that point. But it was also just that maybe they were ready to do it. And right now, we are completely surprised by how the film has traveled all over the place. I just returned from Dublin, where an organization called Women for Election had decided to show the film and invite us over.
Because they're trying to get more women into elected positions in Ireland.
Yeah,
they're using the film to inspire that.
Yeah, they only have 23% women in the parliament. And so they're going to do another screening. The film is going to open up in Japan next week. Japan, they are going to have a women's strike in 2026.
They've already formed an executive committee, and they're creating merchandise around our film. They're going to sell the merchandise to raise money to have a strike in Japan, which is one of the lowest on the gender equality, even though it's such a highly developed country. Yeah. We've been interviewed by dozens of female Japanese journalists who are so excited about starting this movement.
This is a really strong demonstration in the film that you have to have a very clear message. And you have to have people united around that singular message that leads to the action and action is still happening. You haven't achieved 100% yet in Iceland, but you're really close and you're better than everybody else in the world.
It took 5 years for Vigdis to be elected. The next day, everything went to the same old shit. Sorry, excuse my language, but
totally fine.
But let me just give you an example. I have come to see this film as the greatest social impact of any action in Iceland in the 20th century, and it had the huge impact. But like when we were looking for archival footage, we found out that there was only 15 minutes left of archival footage from our state TV station, and the rest had been erased because they needed to use the tapes. So they didn't recognize this immediately as such an important event. So people kind of, it took 50 years, we have gone overboard in Iceland now. You know, we have a woman president, the prime minister is a woman, the three party leaders of the ruling government are women. We have 7 ministers out of 12 that are women. The bishop is a woman. The chief of police is a woman. So we have really gone overboard. And this in a world where everything is shifting to the other direction. So, you know, hopefully Iceland can continue to inspire in that way.
One of the feminists said to me, you know, Pam, a lot of countries had a strong feminist movement in the 1970s. The difference for us in Iceland is we never stopped. So what happened was in the 80s, it wasn't the Red Stockings anymore, but a whole nother group of women, as Hrafna said, standing on the shoulders of what happened in the 70s. And now they had a female president, the first democratically elected female president in the world. Then they took up the importance of electing women to elected positions. Then that started to shift policy. I think one thing that's extraordinary about the changes in Iceland, you can have laws that are written, but in Iceland, the women's movement over these decades has managed to change the way that people think. And I think that's the hardest thing to do. They've changed the paradigm to the point where there's agreement, even though they're not totally equal yet, there's agreement that that is the goal that everyone's working for and that it would be good for everyone. I think it's just extraordinary and something that inspires me for the rest of us.
Let me just qualify this in another way. You know, Vigdís was president for 16 years. When she decided she was not going to run and they had new candidates, there were children that would say, there's one specific boy that said to his mother, wow, I didn't know men could be presidents.
Finding the newspapers and the video and the interviews, how long did that? I mean, that seems like that was a pretty enormous effort to find what you could find.
It wasn't the selfie culture where every time you go out to do something, you're documenting it. So we didn't have like anything of the women at the time. But then Hrapa knew that one of them had a Super 8 camera and had filmed some of their meetings and some of them out in the field. And, you know, we used every second of that. But then, you know, and then our researcher called me one day and said, oh, we've got an anniversary coming up. And this man named Snorri put some pictures up on Facebook of the day. And I think we ought to pursue that. Well, my husband and I ran to Snorri's house. He was an engineer at the time, so we had a really good camera. And he looked out of his office that day and he was like, what is going on in the square? And he told his boss he was taking the day off to film. And he just took beautiful pictures. And what I love about, and he was so generous. He just opened them up to us, gave us all of his pictures. And what I love about them is they capture the expressions of the women. Kind of the people who were filming for the television station wanted to show us how big the crowd was. And yeah, it was really big. But he was showing us this look of amazement on the women's face. We're so grateful to Snorri.
How much has it been shown in the United States?
It's a very difficult time for niche documentaries to get wide distribution in North America, in the United States. You know, Netflix is doing true crime and, you know, celebrities. And those are places that PBS a couple years ago they've been tracking our film. They wanted to create a whole special around our film. That can't happen anymore. We don't know whether the PBS affiliates are going to even have their licenses soon. So they just can't do that. So we've been in a lot of festivals in the United States. We even won the Audience Award at Mill Valley. We've had enthusiastic, you know, sold out screenings in Boulder and different places around this country. But we certainly don't yet have a streamer. And we're sort of holding off on the educational distribution until we may go the route. There are a number of streamers now that filmmakers themselves are creating so that people can have access to their work. But what's going on now is exactly what you're doing. People contact us because they've heard about it, and then we send them a link.
I'm delighted that we're having something like this in Savannah, you know, because, you know, were it not for Patrick and the Hindsight Film Festival and also this other organization called Cinema Savannah, we would be bereft of anything other than, you know, the big blockbusters that come at the main movie houses, because we're not seen as a large enough market. But we are sort of this unique space where we have an art school, we have a lot of filmmakers here, we have a really strong creative community. So this is really the right place for it to land, and I'm so excited that we have it. And then I'm getting this chance to talk to you all about it. What I thought was interesting too was the newspaper, and it was transformative for that editor. And he gave them more. He gave them not just the front page, he gave them the inside, because it did change the way he thought.
Yeah, I think eventually it did. I think he realized, he was one of the few that realized the power in this.
Mm-hmm.
I said to him in our conversation, Sturmer, the progressive newspapers at the time were covering the women's movements. Why weren't you? And
Right.
he sat up in his chair and he got very angry. He said, Pam, it was the Cold War.
Oh, that was more important. Yeah.
I love the way our animator, Joel Orloff, who has a great sense of humor. I love the way when he animates that negotiation with typesetters, he kind of shows Sturmer kind of sweating and kind of
Yes. Yeah. No, I love the use of animation.
It gave us freedom to render things that we couldn't otherwise have done. So it was brilliant. I really commend her on it.
It was a fun partnership because Joel's here in America, the editing room was in America, but Hrapa and our researcher were looking at all the drawings. So, it starts with a little drawing before you do all the work of turning it into animation. And they would scrutinize it to be sure that it was consistent with, that there was nothing that felt off to an Icelandic eye.
Pamela, from your perspective, you talk about that you had gone to events with your mother for the Equal Rights Amendment, and we still as a nation have not passed the Equal Rights Amendment. And it seems like every few years, as certain strides are made, there's always a backlash. Right now, you see the social influencing of traditional wives or trad wives, like showing up on social media. Women getting pushed out of the military, and out of leadership positions, and a rising through a very vocal sort of religious community that's like women need to submit to their husbands. They need to, take care of the home. Their highest and best use is as a mother. Those are, voices that are coming up again and are amplified in our current social media climate. How do you think, where do you see this documentary sort of speaking to the people who are like, this is the voice we also need to amplify?
I love the Hindsight Film Festival. I wish every city had one. I love it that you look back, because we forget how things were unless we tell that story. I was just at the National Museum here in DC for African American History and Culture. And Bell Hooks' phrase is all over that museum, that the way we rebel is by telling our story. And I think by going back to women in China, when they saw our film in Iceland, so there's some Chinese entrepreneurs in Iceland who saw it, said, what Icelandic women were, what they were facing in the 1970s is what we're facing today in China. So we're bringing back a moment and bringing it to life that otherwise would be forgotten. So I think, if you want to be a trad wife, and I do wonder who's running that movement, like maybe it's men, I don't know, but at least know what the past was. Maybe a contemporary Betty Friedan will come out of the dark and write today's feminine mystique. Because, I think you know what I'm saying.
But there always seems to be that pushback as progress is made, at least here. It seems like, I don't know if that's the same in Iceland, where there was at any point sort of pushback, or it's always just been a progress toward this agreed upon goal.
Just slow progress forward, and like I said, I thought really we had elections last year, and I thought we might be in trouble, but it ended up with a beautiful result where, we had a pretty centrist government, and we avoided a right-wing But there is a small fringe there that's talking against women's rights, and but it's a very small fringe at this point.
And one thing that's happened, Amy, you were talking about the situation in America. We still don't have the Equal Rights Amendment. We're the only developed country that doesn't have 1 day of guaranteed maternity leave. Even in Japan, women have guaranteed maternity leave. They're not supposed to keep working, but if they do, they have guaranteed maternity leave. So one thing that happened when more women got into elected positions in Iceland is today, and they keep revising it, the most recent parental leave has something like a year between the man and the woman. And so that changes a father's relationship to his family and to the children. And my impression as I talked to Icelandic men was that they felt that this was a good thing. So there are kind of social benefits, that start to happen, which unfortunately we haven't seen yet in our country, but we can hope.
Thank you both so much. I am so honored to get to talk to you both about this really important film.
Thank you for your really thoughtful questions.
Yeah.
And
well, I hope our paths do cross where we get to meet in person sometime.
that'd be great.
One of these days.